Drums of War, Chapter 41, 2 of 3, Resolve. On the surface of Naxaru, Emily was finding herself looking forward to a cold shower once she got to base. She would have been looking forward to a hot shower, but apparently the army could only produce water in 3 temperatures: cold, frigid, and blistering. For some reason, the engineer corps was concerned with trifling details, such as making sure the Undercity didn't collapse under the base, perimeter security, the artillery actually working, and surface-to-orbit comms working. Some people just can't prioritize. So the dubious pleasure of shivering under the shower head and scrubbing until she felt clean was a guiding light of relaxation at the end of another day of grueling work. Comfort and luxury, no matter how tenuous, must wait on the moment, and, in their case, they had finally found something mission-relevant. To call their search difficult would have been to understate the issue. This was no mere urban environment, which again would be an exercise in understatement. It was a planetary industrial center devoted in large part to foundry operations, which was built on top of a completely different set of industrial infrastructure, which was again built on top of another completely different set of infrastructure, which was itself sitting atop of crisscrossing tunnels, making a positive maze of the planet's crust. This, plus an R&I assault, plus an army invasion, did not bode well for the structural integrity of, well, anything. Matters weren't helped by the exarchs of command's utter lack of care of collateral damage. If they had to use a plasma caster designed to demolish enemy fortifications to take out a Terran tank, they'd use it, and damn the consequences when they missed. This had meant the majority of her and her team's time was spent administering life-saving first aid, directing the walking wounded, and making some very tough calls about which brutalized slaves are likely to survive long enough to be saved. However, that isn't to say that they hadn't had any time for the primary mission. They found Private Bruce Everett munching a crayon and showing a remarkable lack of concern for his missing leg. His armor had applied pressure at the thigh, and Medtech Watkins had some very colourful things to say about the sanity of Belters. The trooper replied with some equally colourful things about the intelligence of Martians, and Emily tried not to giggle at the familiar argument. However, that was 3 days prior. Now they found the tip of a snapped R&I bayonet near a gaping hole in what was occasionally qualified as the ground. "Why are they always getting lost downward?" Alexei moaned as he looked leerily at the uncertainty-supported rubble making up the sides of the hole. "Because holes in the ground might hide enemies," Juan answered sardonically. "I need an engineer and someone who can calm an R&I trooper," Emily ordered as she, too, reached the hole. Alexei glared at her through his transparent faceplate. She grinned at him and continued, "I want Dr. Patel to stay here, and Juan and the probie will track us on the surface in case we don't come up the way we went down." "And if we lose you?" Medtech Watkins asked soberly. "Switch to our paired beacons. They should work even if comms gets blocked. If we get in trouble, I'll use Morse code if needed." "Morse code?" he asked. "Juan, know it, Emily. How do you get through boot?" "Later. All right, people, we only have so much time, and our missing troopers have less. Let's move." Emily and Alexei began to carefully clamber down the shifting rubble, and the distant rumbling of artillery and tanks, and the closer, more disconcerting sounds of skirmishers with small arms were slowly smothered by layers of metal and concrete, or at least the local equivalent. And the always concerning sounds of running water. Running water can kill faster than a collapse underground, if it's more than a trickle. "I'm thinking maybe it is you are wanting me all to yourself," Alexei said as he clicked his headlights on and started scanning back and forth from the opening large enough for an R&I trooper to fit through when they came to the bottom. "Oh," Emily said absently as she did the same. "And who exactly am I keeping you from?" "Dr. Patel, obviously. She is, how to say, having the hots for me." A spluttering, choking sound came over the comms, and he said, "See? She was thinking you did not notice." "I was under the impression that you were an item once Cap caught you both in the same supply closet," Emily casually said as she began to crawl into a tight opening created by an alarming shear in a beam butted up against a large warp section of sheet metal covered in the kinds of scrapes a man in power armor might leave if wriggling through in a hurry. More spluttering and choking proceeded. How did you hear about that? A prep cook saw the whole thing. It was all over the mess hall the same day, Joanne helpfully informed her. Dang it, John, why do you have to go ruining my leaderly mystique? I was not meaning to spill the secret, Alexei muttered, and Emily had to content herself with imagining the reddening ears as she found that the space beyond was just big enough to gain her hands and knees. You're a fascinating love life aside, MedTech Watkins said coolly. What's the situation down there? Tight but stable, Emily said as she crept along, making sure to look out for any sign that the trooper was behind a collapse or under one. Alexei made a noise behind her, and she amended, Stable-ish. We're not seeing an alternate path down here yet, Joanne said, but this place is commented dice, a clusterfuck. Could be another hole opens up under me just 'cause I said there isn't one. Keep looking, Joanne, and maintain activity on the secondary objective. Roby's quick at rendering aid, especially with stabilizing neck and spine injuries. We might have to start using his name if you could pull this. Thank you, Joanne, Emily said sturdily, before he could get the insult all the way out. It was important for the new guy to know that he needs to loosen up, but not to be an ass about it, or at least let someone else only be a little bit of an ass about it. For the most part, it's hungry people or walking wounded right here, he continued in a more professional tones. It seems that if someone got hurt in the fighting here, Joanne left the rest and said. Emily knew anyway. Not many injured, but a lot of dead. Watch each other's backs up there, Emily said. Remember, we're invading this time. They might decide that it's our fault their house ate a plasma bolt and decide to do something about it. The passage they were following came to an abrupt end and opened up into a more reasonably sized passage running perpendicular to it. However, there was a good 6-foot drop to the floor of what looked like a hallway in the beams of her headlights. Situation change, Emily said. We're in the facility designed for occupancy of some kind. It has a hallway. Then she braced herself and tumbled to the floor. It was really too bad that nobody saw, because she was pretty sure that she looked heroic and badass. Alexei managed a somewhat less graceful dismount. Once he collected himself from his tangled heap on the floor, he examined the hallway and declared, Probably won't cave in and killing us unless we sneeze. Achoo, Emily said dryly, and got the long-suffering look in return. Left or right? Never split up underground, not both. Not both, she agreed. The pair carefully scrutinized the passageway for possible clues, which, while not abundant, were present. Emily found plasma burns on the walls, and based off the burn pattern, she pointed towards the source and said, That way. Alexei nodded and followed, and noted a few steps along. Mag-Ac hits, and pointed at small holes punched through the concrete. Status change, Emily said. Found evidence of RNI weaponry. Godspeed, MedTech Watkins said, and Emily thought there was a sort of earnest will behind the word. Emily had to restrain herself from taking great ground-eating strides, and instead took care to place her feet where there wasn't a hole leading to who knows where. This became even more difficult when they discovered the corpses of an Axark warrior who was missing a good quarter out the back of his head. Status change, Emily said again, the familiar feeling of hope welling up in her heart. Enemy corpse shows evidence of RNI weaponry. Our boy went this way, people. The hope in her was tinged with worry when they found the red smear on the floor, and another, and another, and another. As the worry grew, and the hope dwindled, until there became a trail of drips that led to a still set of RNI Chimpmando pattern power armor, and her hope died. Emily plugged her armor's data cable into the corresponding port in the trooper's armor and confirmed what she already knew. He's been dead for hours. Tag the location for remains for reclamation. There's a potential alternate way up, Joanne said soberly. Sending a packet to you now. Emily clicked her lights off and looked up at the darkness, hiding the low ceiling from her, while she blinked the tears out of her eyes, and swallowed the lump in her throat before she clicked them on again to say, You still have more boys out there, people. They don't have much time. About that, Joanne said. We're close to the last known location of Lance Corporal Ned Norman. And there's a note, it says, that Norman claims he'll be fine and can wait, but that was almost a week ago. Well, let's go be heroes, Emily sighed. One trip to the surface and totally not disgustingly unhealthy energy drink break later, and the team was carefully shifting the rubble of a collapsed building. They made contact with Lance Corporal Norman, who said, Shit, I was starting to think you all forgot about me. That wouldn't be so bad, except the water pipe I was drinking from dried up yesterday. Still got plenty of crayons." "You can actually eat those things?" Ted Watkins asked with clear disbelief. "Calories is calories," the troopers replied chipperly. "Though I'll admit I never thought I'd miss MREs." "I thought R&I troopers eating crayons was a joke," Emily said, nonplussed. "It is, and it ain't. Round 8 centuries back, some jackass in the Navy heard an old joke about the old wet Navy's infantry eating crayons, and so they decided to change the name of our emergency rations. Prick," the unflappable trooper explained. "Now we have bottled water and real actual beef jerky on this side of the rubble. And I'd be digging to get it if my power armor didn't get fucked up when the building fell on me. I'm just glad this void was in wriggling distance. I'd prefer not to get blowed up by my own armor." "Please do not blow yourself up for some beef jerky and prove every stereotype about better Texas correct," Ted Watkins remarked. "How dare you? I'm from Greater Texas. Don't your ears work right?" Ted Watkins snorted and told him, "As if there was a difference between the accents. If you weren't on the other side of a pile of rubble and saving my skin and offering me food, I'd whip you up one side of the street and down the other for that." "You'd try," Ted Watkins said with a sly grin, and the trooper on the other side of the comms was obliged to do his level best to not choke on his laughter. One trapped trooper freed, and the team began to lope back to base, and the promise of cold showers, hot dinners, and cots to sleep on before beginning the work again in the morning. In what was probably once a moderately luxurious apartment deep within the forgotten subterranean networks below Azad. Once again, Corporal George was grateful that the Republican military held at least some things back from public markets. Low-latency voice, video, and file transfer through what was probably miles of crust material, if he accounted for the planetary curve, was one of them. "Gentlemen, please tell me your base camps are all set up." 3 voices answered him in staggering disharmony. "Aye, sir." "Don't sir me, I'm a corporal," Corporal G answered dutifully. "But in seriousness, please dispense with the sirs for now. I'm all one for tradition, and that one is fun, but we have work to do." "Aye, Blade Leader," PFC Finch said, before anyone else could turn touching base into a hull section. "I've checked and triple-checked. The enemy has nothing on planet that even might accidentally detect our comms. We can talk as much as we like." "I'll run it up the chain," Corporal George said soberly, as he looked towards the corner where his discovery was huddled under the heat-reflective blanket. "Good work, Blade 3. "I'm set up in an abandoned tower right smack in the middle of our area of operation," PFC Bennett said, a little of the bemusement in his voice coming through. "Not one of these buildings is occupied all the way up or all the way down." "Good to hear, Blade 2. Do you still have access to the tunnel network?" "Aye, but I could do the Spider-Man thing here and go unseen. Absolutely no swinging from old cables between buildings," Corporal George chided with mock sternness. "But, Dad," PFC Bennett pretended to whine. The comment drew Corporal George's attention to the tattered decorative fabrics peeling from the walls. He concluded it was too thin and fragile to serve as material for either a cot or a hammock. "Blade 1, Corporal George asked, considering whether he could convince the complication to sleep on his cot and he'd just sleep in the armor until he found suitable materials. "I'm set up near what looks like slave housing. I want to see if I can pick up on attitudes walking around," Lance Corporal Carter explained. "I'm in the tunnels, gentlemen," Corporal George told them. "You probably heard that's been my go-to. Preliminary findings and challenges. Blade 1, start." "Aye, Blade Leader. The slaves are hotly debating whether the local Lord won when he killed our martyr. They don't know much about Jesus, but they do know that he went to the cross willingly, even though he could have smoked the ancient Romans whenever he wanted. There is a general feeling that the local Lord snapped away an open hand, but the question is whether the Christ is strong enough to hit back. Additionally, as noted by Blade 2, this population is well under capacity. They could easily handle full occupancy, and even with everything the way it is, they could sustain enough traffic to keep everyone fed, clothed, etc. Lance Corporal rattled off efficiency. "Blade 2, he asked as 2 plans began to formulate in his mind. "Aye, Blade Leader," PFC said, suddenly serious. "I found the martyr's site. The local lord went through the trouble of embalming the poor friend so that he doesn't have to smell decay when he murders people under him. Please tell me you still want to do something about that." "Aye, I do." "Is that all, Blade 2? "No. He's been going on a propaganda push about the weakness of the God who calls for mercy. The strong have no need for forgiveness. There is no sin in victory of Exur, etc. That, and there's a shipment of power armor from one of the forge worlds we didn't fuck up coming through in 3 days to be divvied up and shipped to the front. Good work, Blade 2. That's going up the chain. My guess is it'll be in the Scabbard team's area. Aye, and they might have some of the info already, but have a complete timetable. Sending it now. Blade 3. Food might be a problem in the future. He'd been issued enough crayons to last a month or 2, but he had no idea how much a growing and healing body needed in terms of calories, or if the colorfully named and humorously shaped rations had other vital nutrients for those processes. Aye, Blade Leader. The nobility is furious over our martyr. Apparently his torture and death didn't quite have the deterrent effect that they were hoping for. And their mid-level aristocrats have secret converts amongst them, not doling out sufficiently harsh punishments for having the prescribed attitudes towards Christ or what they call the vengeful goddess republic. They're running into manpower shortages due to an uptick in executions, and the local breeding program hasn't caught up to the increased death rate, and they're waiting on imported slaves from more populated planets. Moreover, there's a shortage of grain. Apparently 3 entire agricultural worlds have had massive blights, absolutely ruining harvests. And they have to completely destroy any plant material in the fields to get rid of it and import new seed. They suspect divine wrath. It sounds like a bioterrorism to me, PFC Finch explained softly. I don't think it's us, Blade 3. The Republic at any rate. It might be an independent actor, and that could be anyone from anywhere. Food would be a problem. He'd have to give the complication all of the forage and subsist on crayons. Corporal George resigned himself to his culinary fate and said, Good work on secondary objectives, gentlemen. However, I noticed none of you have any intel on our primary. Here he paused and was rewarded with the sound of palms slapping foreheads. The tunnels are intact. The apartment is running water, functional sanitation, data access and lights. The elevators leading downward have power, and I could not see any obstructions in the shafts. Gentlemen, the data center we've been looking for might just be intact, disused, in disrepair, forgotten and neglected, but intact. Should have fucking thought of that, PFC Finch muttered darkly. Also, I found this, Corporal George said as he sent a collection of video files to his team. Videos showing the torture and eventual execution of the martyr on the inverted cross that they intended on making use of. The comms were as silent as a grave. His name was Aidan Purefoy. He was a courageous man, and he deserves to be respected as the victor he is. I want a way to quickly and quietly cut that altar in half. Tight plasma beams should work, PFC Bennett said quietly. Blade 3? I can probably rig one up. The question would be power supply. 1. Unknown. Worst case, we can use the power pack from the suit of armor. If we don't need to be quiet, Blade 2 can cut it with explosives. Noted. Give me a timetable of when we can move on the martyr site in both scenarios and start leaving messages for the nobility. Now comes the closed fist, or something like that, and start building a target list. With luck, we can get some of them to panic and run before we start eliminating targets. Nakuzin does not escape, though, and I want him to know we're coming. Am I understood, gentlemen? Nice, Blade Leader, came the discordant confirmation. Blade Leader out. Now for the complication. Corporal George switched to squad-level comms and reported everything he and his team had learned, and got some interesting tidbits about critical transportation infrastructure vulnerabilities in his area of operations in return. Then he requested to consult with the corpsman. This was unusual enough to get kicked straight up to Lieutenant Hammond. Boy, if you're injured enough to need a corpsman but can still talk, just say what's broken how, the lieutenant trolled. Sir, it's a complication. We don't like complications, boy. No, sir, we don't. But we deal with them anyway. Aye, that we do. What kind of complication? A half-starved boy, pre-puberty, with a severely broken leg passed out in the tunnels. I'm guessing he crawled there to escape getting sacrificed for being injured. A witness of any age could expose an operator, could leave signs that the authorities might notice, even inadvertently. A child being cared for could be a fanatic, a ready and stabbed an operator in his sleep. Taking care of this boy could put the operator who took him in at risk, and put the entire mission at risk. That didn't change what the right thing to do was. And too, Lieutenant Hammond didn't hesitate any more than Corporal George had. I'll patch you through. Mox Uriel out. This is Blaze 2, go for consult, Specialist Sam Reed piped. It always surprised Corporal George how high the big man's voice was. Corporal George how high the big man's voice was. Injured civilian, broken leg, malnourished, found unconscious. Didn't wake up upon being moved. Give me a live feed. You have lights other than the ones in your helmet, and camp light. Camp has decent light, Corporal George explained as he retrieved his helmet and used his fingers to manipulate certain toggles under a panel inside it. Give me a second. I gave him my e-blanket, since he was cold. You weren't kidding about malnourished, Specialist Reed nearly whispered, as the blanket was drawn back to reveal the slight frame of the child beneath. His limbs were spindly and frail-looking. His joints looked swollen, his cheeks hugged his skull, and there was deep furrows between his visible ribs. That was just the boy's general condition. His left leg had 2 unnatural bends in it, and was black with swelling, bruising, even in its skeletal state. You're going to need to set those brakes and splint them. I'll try to get clearance to come give him a cast. You see the vids? Aye, Specialist Reed nearly growled. Can we use that device to force cellular regen? I'd need to investigate further. The fact that the Exarch use it as a means to prolong torture indicates that it might not be suitable for long-term healing. Next question. Can these guys eat crayons? You're a cruel, cruel bastard. How could you do such a terrible thing to a child? He needs calories now, and he probably won't care about how bad it tastes, Corporal George said irritably. Easy there, Blade Leader, just joshing you a little, and you're right. Specialist Reed fell silent in thought, or maybe calculations, and eventually said, Give him about 1/8 of a crayon every 4 hours. I'd suggest breaking it up and mixing it with water so that you can drink it. Start now. After that, put something sturdy, but with a little give between his teeth. You don't want him to bite his tongue off when you set his leg. I'll need to forage for splint materials, Corporal George clarified. I was hoping he'd regain consciousness and be able to help in locating some. Unlikely. I suggest you begin the crayon slurry. Your assessment of his state was accurate. He needs calories now. No further questions. Keep him warm and avoid moving him again. Blaze 2, out. Corporal George wasted no time in following the corpsman's recommendations. 1 caloric dosing later, one couldn't properly call a slurry being poured down the child's throat a meal, and Corporal George was making his way to the surface disguised as one of the many nameless slaves beneath the notice of even each other. If any of them didn't have the curiosity beaten out of them at an early age, one of their fellows emerging from the shadows of the forgotten depths of their decaying home might have at the very least given them pause. But for one, they had been, and for another, Corporal George was adept at moving in such a way that their eyes would slide over his cloaked form, dismissing him as just another worn-down cog in the same machine as they. The hunched, downcast, shuffly gait still disquieted him to adopt, as he couldn't do so without remembering that it was the natural state of those around him. Even here on the surface, the sun was a distant memory. As the towers, hungrily reaching for that memory, like grasping fingers, cast choking shadows upon the alleys and streets they created below, only mildly mitigated by the flickering illumination of regularly spaced and irregularly functioning lights. The thrumming murmur of falling feet, rambling trains, and cycling dolls filled the air, and was occasionally cut by a clear voice speaking in the harsh, guttural language of the Exarch to make various announcements of various useful or else make propagandistic statements about the state of the war or what the correct religious beliefs were. Equally distant was the thought of fresh air. Even more pronounced here than in the tunnels was a pervasive pall of decay, a sour, sickly scent that turned the belly and set the mouth to watering in preparation of vomit. Every stirring of the air brought another new twist to the rotten air. It was as if the city was itself a massive, hidden heap, and the Exarch were merely a scavenging rats eking out a miserable existence on the refuse of a long-forgotten civilization. He kept shuffling along until he heard the hushed tones of taboo arguments. He knew he was in a prime location. Then he started winding through the dismal collection of domiciles, looking for what he knew would be there. A recently vacated apartment. No, that was too generous a word. Cell or cubicle would fit what these people lived in better. They weren't even afforded the ability to cook for themselves. However, he found what he was looking for after only 2 hours of searching. The hush fell to silence when he neared a doorway, gaping like an empty eye socket of a skull, and Corporal George knew that its occupants had recently been executed. He sent up a quick prayer that the poor soul's neighbors hadn't already picked the place clean. glanced up and down the empty hall, and slipped soundlessly inside. His prayers were answered, as within he found soap, a threadbare towel, a mostly whole-woven blanket, and a chair made from plastic panels held in an aluminium frame. If there had been any witnesses to see the ease with which Corporal George bent and twisted the cold aluminum until it broke apart due to the friction generated heat once, twice and thrice, they would have wanted to know how he was well fed enough to be so strong. However, there was nobody to see, and so he bent the 3 pieces of aluminium into more or less straight bars and discarded the flimsy faded green plastic panels in the corner of the claustrophobic cubicle. That done, he took a furtive glance out the door to either side to ensure that he was still alone, and fit the pieces into a bundle with the soap and towel wrapped in the blanket. He shouldered the bundle beneath the cloak, and found it only made him look more downtrodden and miserable, and therefore even less notable. He could forage for food once he delved into the forgotten undercity infrastructure, and found the various maintenance override protocols, which were no doubt waiting in nice, printed repair manuals in offices meant for heads of departments, which were just as forgotten as their makers scattered all across the planet. For now the boy shivered in Corporal George's base camp, and more immediate concerns. Since he was already above ground, he shuffled to the looming slab of metal and concrete, which served as the local lord's temple, residence, and seat of power, which would be another otherwise unremarkably, mostly abandoned derelict on this underused and underserved world. As he arrived, he joined a swelling throng pressing towards the broad steps leading to what on the surrounding buildings was the 2nd floor, but of the temple was the entrance. Corporal George had to suppress a shake of his head at the waste of creating such a symbolic gesture. He did not wish to see the interior, not yet, and not during what was clearly an active ceremony. So he rode the ebb and flow of the crowd until he had circled the building and found that the block directly surrounding the towers, or at least their above-ground levels, had been demolished to form a wide plaza about the temple. The better for such gatherings, he supposed. He was going to leave when dozens of massive 20-foot-high screens blazed to life to show the ceremony going on inside. There stood Naku Zin behind a sacrificial altar, and behind and above him were the unblinking dead eyes of the martyred Aidan Purefoy, and before them, both upon the altar, was a victim, her naked chest heaving in terror. Corporal George gritted his teeth at what Naku Zin was eloquently saying with the visuals alone. His fury was kindled as the words came out over the hidden speakers. An unnatural silence fell across the crowd as the tyrant bloomed. Here the serf has committed blasphemy and named herself. Here the serf has betrayed her God and chose the weak God of mercy, who sent only the fool who watches her die. Here lies an unworthy one. May the thirst of Exur, may the stars tremble at his steps, be sated by her unworthy blood and soul. Some blanched, some looked away. A few softly let moans of terror escaped their teeth. Still more sunk deeper into the hollow-eyed stare of despair. But not one exarch in the still crowd was unmoved. It was disgustingly effective. Corporal George did not look away as the wicked dagger flashed and sanguine blood fountained. He did not shut out the shriek of pain and fear that became the gurgling death rattle. He witnessed, then he made his way back into the tunnels. Justice would fall on Naku Zin like a hammer from the heaven itself if Corporal George had anything to do with the matter. But that meant that he'd to get busy. First, see to the boy. Next, there was work to do. Back at base camp, it had been 4 hours, so he was watching the still unconscious boy's autonomic response swallow the slurry for him, and had the leather-wrapped handle of his bayonet, sans blade, tank and pommel, for the safety's sake, prepared for the next step. He reviewed the procedure Specialist Reed had sent him. He had bent the 2 longer pieces to immobilize the boy's leg and ankle with a slight bend at the knee, close to how his unconscious body was already holding it, and had broken the remaining piece into 2 smaller pieces for lateral stabilization above and below the knee. He waited a good 60 seconds to make sure the boy wouldn't vomit, and put the leather between the boy's teeth. Then He checked the rolls of woven medical tape and gauze that he had laid out for binding and realized that everything except himself was prepared. A deep breath in and out, and Corporal Peter George was still absolutely terrified. So he did it again, and reminded himself that if he didn't do this, the boy would likely die, or, if not, be lamed for life. So, failing to quiet his calm, he gathered his courage and put a hand on the boy's chest, gripping him at the knee, and pulled. The boy's eyes leapt open, and he saw jaw clench onto the leather cylinder between his teeth as a feeble howl of pain passed around it. With all of his meager might, he pounded and scratched at the immovable hand keeping him pinned to the floor, and tears flowed like little brooks from his eyes as Corporal George worked to set the second break and get the splint in place and wrapped. The war-hardened corporal felt his throat tighten and blinked back tears lest they cloud his vision and impair the treatment. When he was done, the boy's cries of pain had subsided to agonized panting. Corporal George allowed himself to crumple into the floor and told him, in the language of the exarch, "I am sorry for that. I tried to wake you so that I could warn you about the pain. But you would not wake." That was the closest approximation in their language to "I'm sorry," and the fact rankled at Corporal George. The boy deserved a proper apology. Then he scowled to himself as he said aloud, still in the tongue of exarch, "I can't keep calling you the boy. It is rude." The boy helpfully replied in muffled grunts. Corporal George sighed and picked himself up off the floor, brushed imaginary dust off himself, and very, very carefully moved the boy off the floor and onto his cot, where he'd laid out a blanket for insulation. Then he said, "You are allowed to spit that out. It was there to keep you from biting your tongue off." The boy seemed to realize that he could do so with surprise, and in a feeble wheeze asked, "Who are you?" "My name is Corporal Peter George, Republican Naval Infantry Advanced Drop Scout Trooper of the Deep Recon Scout Battalion," the man answered. "What is your name?" Immediately the boy dropped his gaze to the floor and said, "I have no name, great one, for I was born unworthy of such things." There was no adequate word in the exarch language, so Corporal George used one in commercial English. "Poppycock." "This lowly one does not understand foolishness, nonsense, beneath consideration. Of course you are worthy of a name, and if you don't have one yet, I'll fix that problem." "Why would you do such a thing?" "Why would I splint a crippled boy's leg?" "I know not. Are you a nana?" "No. I think the priest-lord of this area would call me a shadow warrior." "Have you come to punish us?" "No. I have come to achieve victory for my people. This means defeat for your leaders, and it might cause suffering amongst your people. But I cannot change that." "Why do as you are doing? Why speak with one such as I?" "Because it is right to help you, Gideon, and polite to answer your questions as I can." Who is Gideon?" Gideon asked. "He was a warrior whose tale is told in my people's holy tanks from ancient past. In those days, the only enemies my people could fight were others of my people, and it was with a spear and a sword, stone and bow. He was a strong man and a wise leader who trusted God in a desperate hour, and a fine namesake for you." "You speak as the Upside-Down Man did before he was slain," Gideon remarked. "Aiden was one kind of servant. I am another." The unseen sun set on Azad. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.